One of my favorite eras to look back on is the golden age of World Superbike. The riding styles were unique, the characters perfectly fit into the time and its zeitgeist, and the bikes, outside from being amongst the most beautiful ever built, had a special character that even someone who wasn't into the sport could tell apart. For the most part, this era was utterly dominated by Ducati. But one day the higher-ups at Honda looked at what the Italian manufacturer did and said, you know what, we can do that too. And we can do it better. And once Honda released their answer to Ducati onto the circuits of this world, the golden era came to an end. The final nail in the coffin to this era was the brand new name of Grand Prix racing, which was MotoGP. With that brand new name, also new regulations were on the rise, and they made the switch to four-stroke machinery. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's rewind 30 years or so and look at Honda's Superbike answer called RC51. Looking at the world of superbike racing in the 90s, you'll find 7 manufacturers, of which Ducati took like 75% of all the wins. This means that the remaining 6 manufacturers did nothing more than to collect the remaining breadcrumbs. It all started out harmless. To secure a diverse field of bikes, there were rules and regulations set to make it possible for many manufacturers and their different engine concepts to compete more or less on the same level. Since Ducati homologated a V-twin machine instead of like an inline 4 or a V4, they were allowed to race with a larger engine displacement than the rest. In the early days this was less of a problem, but as the years progressed, the engine out of Bologna just grew, while all the others stayed at 750cc. This wasn't too much of a problem, but if we're looking at the most extreme difference in the 99 season, Ducati was racing with a 996cc V-twin machine. Even in the showroom spec sheet, the 996 had 18 Newton meters of torque more than Honda's RC45, and that at 2000 RPM earlier. Of course, the showroom bikes, of which the superbikes are based on, are, in terms of performance, far apart. But there's only so much you can squeeze out of an engine. Or as the old saying goes, there is no replacement for displacement. In the late 90s, after longtime Superbike Honda rider Aaron Slide pushed the factory long enough towards a new bike, he eventually got Colin Edwards on board of the Honda project in '98. Getting Edwards on board alongside Slide was part of Honda's development plan. A development plan to put the Italian manufacturer back into its place and straight up show who the real boss in motorcycle manufacturing is. In '98 it was mostly Aaron Slide's duty to test the new V2 bike. I put new in quotation marks because since what Honda did in the early stages of development was to take their VTR 1000F, aka Firestorm or Super Hawk depending on where you live, which was a racy street legal bike that the factory released a year prior. In '98, Slide had to take some turns on that bike with some modified parts on it. And at that point he described the bike as pretty average. While their current bike, the RC45, was 23 km per hour faster than the V2, the overall package had a really solid basis, since Slide, despite his major deficit in top speed, managed to get into half a second of Shinichi Ito's lap time on the 750. So all Honda needed to find there was some extra speed and they'd already be pretty close to being competitive. That basically sealed Honda's decision to develop on top of the Firestorm for the Superbike season of the year 2000. After that test, the 1998 World Superbike season happened and Aaron Slide almost became world champion on a rapidly aged RC45, while Edwards found his footing within the realms of his new employer. During 1999 and especially towards the end of 99, when the World Superbike season ended, Honda and their riders stayed in Sugo. By that point the bike was basically done, but they needed some final testing right after the season ended to smoothen out the last edges of the project. In early 2000, when they were trying to prepare the bike for the upcoming season, things changed a little bit. While Aaron Slide was basically the main guy for the development of the bike since it started in '98, at this year's test he couldn't really perform and was hospitalized shortly after. In the hospital, the doctors found a 2 cm large brain bleed in the skull of Aaron Slide. Aaron's life and career is a story of its own. If you want to see a video about that, leave a like so I know that you want to see it, and subscribe so you won't miss it. That brain bleed basically put Slide out of the start for the upcoming season and put all the remaining pressure for the final touches and debut season of the new Superbike on Colin Edwards. And oh boy, he delivered. Already in the first race weekend of the 2000 season, it was crystal clear that Honda created something very special. In race 1 and 2 in Kyalami, Colin Edwards came out on top. He followed that double win with 10 more podiums during the rest of the season, of which 6 were celebrated on the top step. This made the RC51, or VTR 1000 SP as it was also called, a World Championship winning bike in the year of its debut. While Ducati answered the following year with Troy Bayliss winning the World Championship and Colin Edwards on the Honda finishing as a runner-up, Edwards then responded in '02 with a World Championship of himself again. He landed on P2 for the most part of the first half of the season, but then turned the tables by winning a whopping 9 races in a row to finish the year on top. Honda also used the bike to compete at the 8 Hours of Suzuka and won every single race they entered with the RC51. Though Honda missed out on a World Superbike Championship in '01, they did not leave empty-handed that year, as the WIM Motors Racing team became that year's endurance world champions using the VTR. Over in the United States, Nicky Hayden competed on the RC51 in the AMA Superbike Championship and managed to win the title in '02 as well. Over the years of the early 2000s, the landscape of superbikes shifted, especially for Japanese manufacturers. Yamaha and Suzuki rolled out their new inline 4-liter bikes onto the World Superbike circuits in '03. A year later, Kawasaki and Honda followed. Honda basically looked at their model lineup and decided to draw most of the inspiration for that new superbike from the Fireblade. So they redeveloped the Fireblade and gave it a bit more CC. And already in '04, it was over for the RC51. Since then, only one rider on board a Honda managed to become a World Superbike champion again, as James Toseland reigned victorious in the 2007 campaign. As I mentioned before, I considered the birth of MotoGP, not Grand Prix motorcycle racing, but the rebranding into MotoGP in '02, as the death, or at least the final nail in the coffin of the golden age of superbikes. At least when it comes to the greatest stage of superbikes in terms of the World Superbike. These new 4-stroke prototypes that needed to be developed for MotoGP were really expensive. And especially Honda, with the golden goose of Valentino Rossi under their wings, wouldn't want to risk anything and make sure their new bike will be the best. With the shift in focus, so shifted the budget. And Honda wasn't the only one. And when manufacturers focus on a different project, so will their sponsors. And that will eventually affect the exposure of the sport. And while there are many different smaller points that dug the grave for the golden age of superbike racing, to me it's really easy to pinpoint the final straw on 2002. A year in which ironically the title went to the RC51. Today this era is unimaginable. While there is still some professional or semi-professional superbike racing in any region of the world, you got to remember, back then some of those were bigger than Grand Prix racing in a lot of places. Japanese manufacturers were scouting for talent in the national championships of frickin' Australia. Nothing against Australia, I sure love the people there. And while this country has exported some of the greatest riders ever, I don't think anyone today would think of Australia when they think of road racing. Unless maybe Australian road racing fans, I guess. In Europe, we had 2 major players that promoted superbike races. One was obviously World SBK, the other one was Pro Superbike, which those two are a story of itself. But when it came to TV coverage in especially Central Europe, they were almost on par. So much so that Flamini, the promotional boss of World SPK, had to bring out some morally questionable contracts to ruin Pro Superbike, which just had less of a budget. like I said, this thing is a whole story of its own. I'm only scratching the surface here. Anyway, the point I was trying to make. In its golden age, Superbike racing was regionally bigger than Grand Prix motorcycle racing, and it basically ended with a final hooray, a final true passion project to dethrone another manufacturer. Click right here for a video about Suzuki. Click right here for another World Superbike story. And here for my experience at the 8 hours of Spa-Francorchamps. Thank you for watching, and until next time. Bye bye.